And welcome back to Capitol Tonight. So Buffalo boosters were not pleased to learn that an initiative that they have long championed, which is of course called UB 2020, was not included in the budget that was passed by the legislature in spite of a push by the Senate GOP to have it in there. Governor Andrew Cuomo subsequently pledged to host a summit in hopes of finally breaking the logjam that has built up around this issue. But that was not sufficient for the Senate Democrats, who blame the majority for failing to deliver and place much of the blame on the shoulders of my next guest. Mark Grisanti is a freshman senator who represents parts of Erie and Niagara counties. He's joining us in the studio this evening. Senator, it's great to see you.
Good evening. How are you?
I am well, thank you. Thanks for being here. I just want to briefly play some of your remarks from the evening on which you were debating this particular bill.
Okay.
Okay? So let's take a listen to that.
This bill is not dead. This bill has moved faster in the last 90 days than it has in 3 years. When the Democrats were in the majority, the bill couldn't even pass. I've been here 90 days, and this bill has gone further than ever. It is not dead. We have talked to the governor. We have commitments. There's a summit. If you want to use it for political gain, that's fine. But I've talked to the people at UB 2020 about this bill. I've talked to the tradespeople, and they are ecstatic as to where UB 2020 lays at this point in time.
So, okay, you had some pretty strong words. Obviously, you feel strongly about this. Previously, you had said that you might withhold your vote for the budget.
Right.
In fact, you and I, when you were just a candidate, had this discussion because Bill Stikowski had tried to hold up the budget. What changed your mind?
Well, I think that the changes that were made in the initial, from the initial bill regarding the financial component, to me there's three components: the financial, procurement, public-private partnership. But with the change in the financial component, my understanding was that it was all that the Assembly was concerned about regarding UB 2020 in its infant stages. When we made the changes, having it pass in the Senate 55-1, individuals that I talked to in the Assembly, they said, that they felt strong that it could move. And in fact, some Democrats in the Assembly side have come over. About the Thursday before the budget was announced that it was going to go forward, we had a meeting with Howard Glazer, who's a member of Governor Cuomo's team, and some of his staff, telling him the importance that if this is not in the bill, I need to have some commitment and some reassurances that, in fact, this is on the governor's agenda. It is something that's important, not only for the economic development in Western New York, but also for the governor to show good faith to Western New York that he is tentative to what their needs are there in economic development. If the whole idea of this budget process was no taxes, reduce government spending, and jobs, 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 those are jobs, jobs, jobs in Buffalo. Okay,
so now Howard Glazer is actually the director of operations, the state operations. So I understand that there's going to be a summit and the governor is interested, his spokesman has said as much, but have they given you a date? I mean, were you willing, something that you received made you feel comfortable enough to say, okay, I will vote for this. So what was it?
Well, after we had that meeting, then that following Sunday, Governor Cuomo had announced that there was an agreement between the three majority leaders, stating that we're going to move forward on this budget. But then he mentioned about 5 times in his speech about UB 2020, and in fact, he will have a budget, he will have this move forward by this session. And then Senator Skello stated the same thing. Assemblyman Silver mentioned it, didn't give any specifics, but then Deborah Glick also mentioned, who's the chair of the higher education in the Assembly, that she understands that a summit is coming. So I was still kind of not sure whether that was enough of a commitment, but then I thought to myself, well, here we have the governor of New York State. He's my governor. He's the governor of all the people in New York State, and I feel I can trust him. If he's going to make that statement that it's going to happen this summit, we're going to get it together and get it done this session, and I have that commitment from the Senate conference as well, I figured go forward. And just this morning, myself and a few other senators met with President Tripalti of UB to discuss the summit and what the procedure was that was going to take place. So that just happened about an hour ago.
But we have no date yet, is that correct?
What's going to happen today is after they met with us, they're meeting with the Assembly. The Assembly then is going to talk to see what other issues they have with regards to this particular bill. There's also talk about Stony Brook being included in the bill, which we don't have a problem with. But something that makes sense is that in the financial component of the bill, when you have a cap at $60,000 for tuition, so if families make it $60,000 or less, they are locked into tuition for this year. That may not work so well in Stony Brook because of the difference in income by region. So there may have to be something in that end tweak there. But I'm comfortable with how the financial component was hammered out to that end, and I'm comfortable still with the other areas. And in fact, in the budget, Liz, procurement was in there.
Yeah.
And also the renewal of the $138 million that was specifically earmarked for UB 2020, of which UB is already spending right now, and projects in the Buffalo-Niagara Medical Corridor.
There's a lot of talk about trust, though. I mean, Senator Skelos also is speaking about trust with the governor when it comes to the prison situation. I mean, instead of 3,500 beds that the Senate Republicans have agreed to close, it's now 3,700 beds. And you're not going to have some kind of commission that has guidelines. It's going to be done by the administration with the consult of the legislature. So all of this trust, I mean, if you get stabbed in the back in some way, and I'm not suggesting that it will happen, but it's politics after all, and it could happen, what kind of recourse are you going to have? You've already voted yes.
Right. You know, I'm very optimistic because how far this bill has gone in the last 90 days. And while I was making that decision on which way to vote, two things came to mind. One, I've talked to the powers that be at UB who actually made this come to reality, this bill in the beginning from the past 3 years ago. And I've talked to the labor unions, and I've talked to other people, and I said, you know, are you satisfied where this is right now? And they said, you know, Mark, we never thought that this was going to get to this point in time. We didn't think it was going to be even on the table in this legislative session. So we are ecstatic where it is right now. That's number one. Number two, you know, having a majority of 32-30, that's not what was taking place in some of the things that were being voted on in the past. And in particular, this budget. I mean, you saw that most of the pieces of this budget, there were maybe only one or two, I think the max was maybe 7 nay votes on different pieces. So the higher education piece, I think, only had about 9 no votes on it.
Well, but to that end, I mean, you could have very well voted no to signal your displeasure and also stick to some previous comments that you had made as a symbol. I mean, really, because to be honest, Dean Skelos didn't need your vote. There were, as you know, the 4 IDCs, the breakaway Democrats. It wasn't going to be a make or break on Mark Grisanti, unlike, for example, the Bill Stikowski situation where he was single-handedly able to say, okay, forget it.
Exactly.
So.
But the important part of the process was, and what I was explaining was that I'm not just a one-issue person. There were many things that were in that bill. Let's take higher education. When you have 1 out of the 3 components in there and the funding coming back, and where we were and how far this bill had progressed, and they have the commitment from the governor that a summit was going to happen, I was comfortable with that. I mean, you know, as you know, I've been an attorney for 18 years. You know how to compromise and negotiate. I'm not going to sit there in a corner and whine that, hey, this wasn't in there. Because the other pieces that were in there for Western New York were the restoration of funding in Roswell Park. Really, one of the big items for me, too, Liz, was the 4201 schools, the schools for the deaf, the blind, and the handicapped. I could not believe that was not even in the budget. So I was happy that was restored. Some of the funding that was zeroed out by the governor in the Assembly for major projects in Buffalo, Olmsted Park, Niagara River Greenway Commission, new project called the Hoyt Lake Project to clean up Hoyt Lake in Buffalo. There was other things that were in there, restoration of EPIC funds for seniors for prescriptions. So not being a one-issue person, I said, these are also important to Western New York. And I was comfortable at that point in time where UB 2020 was.
Do you still feel, I mean, your comments at the top here when you were debating on the floor, you were, of course, talking about the Democrats hadn't done enough in your mind to really pressure their counterparts in the Assembly.
Right.
And Toby Stavisky got upset because when she was higher ed chair, there was a vote on this. It was a committee vote. It didn't come to the floor, is my understanding.
Right.
But do you still feel that way? Do you still feel like there's not enough movement on the Assembly side? Because it really does take 3 to tango, as I've said so many times on this show.
It really does, and I actually had, about 3 weeks prior to this budget being announced, a meeting with Deborah Glick and explained to her what the changes were. I was a little disappointed because she said at that point in time she has yet to even see the new bill, which was already done, you know, probably 3 weeks before that meeting. So, you know, it got down to a point where, you know, we were talking to the Western New York delegation in the Assembly, and they said, Mark, we do have, at the meeting with Howard Glazer, they said we do have some meeting from some movement from some downstate Democrats. They mentioned some names I couldn't remember what they were off the top of their head. They were coming on board with the UB 2020 plan. And really what I was most aggravated about and what I was trying to explain my vote is when Senator Diaz actually stood up and said, hey, Senator Grisanti, where's UB 2020? I kind of took offense to that because prior to that and the day before, it was almost like theatrics were going on the floor. with senators asking questions of each other, and I didn't find that funny at all. I mean, this was a very serious budget where people were going to get hurt, and we were trying to make a bad budget better. And I don't believe he's ever been to Buffalo, and I don't believe he ever even knows what UB 2020 is all about.
Well, he voted yes for it.
He did vote for it, and when he voted yes for it, he actually explained that he understood what the changes were, and that Senator Kennedy had said to him, that this was important to get this done. It actually took convincing on both sides of the aisle to actually get it to that 55-1 vote. But I thought that he was making light of something that I know it's important. It's not in the budget. Am I disappointed? Yes, but there are other actions that are in there that were important to me in Western New York. So I didn't find that there was a time to make a comment, and I didn't find it funny at all. I thought it was something that, that process for those last 2 days had to be something taken very seriously.
Well, we will see. Of course, obviously, there's about 3 months left in the legislative session, and we'll be watching UB 2020 because it's of great importance to Western New York, of course, and it could at some point be, as you note, important in Long Island and perhaps even statewide.
Absolutely. And like I said, we met with the president today. They're meeting with the Assembly, so it's already Monday morning, a couple days after the budget passed, and we're already moving forward on it.
Okay. Senator Mark Grisanti, thanks very much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
And we did not get to redistricting, but we will.